In the summer of 1953, the United States government paid a group of hired thugs, corrupt generals, and fake protesters to destroy the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. They did it in 4 days. They did it for oil. And the next 70 years, they lied about it. This is the story of Mohammad Mosaddegh, a man who dared to tell Britain and America that Iran's oil belonged to Iran, and what the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world did to make sure he never got the chance to prove it. It starts as so many modern disasters do, with a contract that only one side truly understood. In 1901, a British businessman named William Darcy paid the Persian government £60,000 for the exclusive rights to drill for oil across almost the entire country. 7 years later, his team struck the largest oil deposit in history. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company was born, and Britain would never look back. By the time World War II ended, the renamed Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, majority owned by the British government, was the most profitable enterprise in the British Empire. The Abian refinery was the largest in the world. Billions of dollars in oil flowed out of Iran every year, and Iran received 16% of the profits. Iranian workers at the Abadan refinery lived in segregated slums without running water. British staff lived in air-conditioned company housing with swimming pools and clubs. Iranians were barred from senior position. When Iran asked for better terms for the 50-50 revenue split that American oil companies were offering Saudi Arabia, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company said no. Mohammad Mosaddegh had been warning about this for 20 years. A Swiss-educated lawyer, a former provincial governor, a member of parliament who had walked out of a session in protest when foreign domination was on the agenda. He was not a communist. He was not a radical. He was, in the most precise sense of the word, a nationalist. He believed that Iran's resources belonged to Iran. In March 1951, the Iranian parliament voted to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The vote was nearly unanimous. Mosaddegh became prime minister. The streets of Tehran exploded with celebration. In London, the mood was rather different. Britain pulled every British technician out of Iran's oil facilities overnight, and then organized a global embargo to make sure no one else could step in to replace them. Tanker companies were warned off. Refineries sat idle. Any nation or company that tried to buy Iranian oil was threatened with legal action. The Persian Gulf filled with Royal Navy warships. And it worked. Iran had the oil. It just couldn't sell it to anyone. Mosaddegh went to the United Nations. He argued Iran's case in New York, speaking from a hospital bed, fragile and magnetic, and utterly compelling. The Security Council ruled that the dispute was an internal Iranian matter. Iran had won the legal argument. The blockade continued anyways. By 1952, Iran's economy was in freefall. Government revenue had collapsed. Britain was waiting Mosaddegh out, convinced that economic pain would eventually force him to capitulate or be replaced. What they hadn't counted on was the change of government in Washington. The Truman administration had been sympathetic to Mosaddegh. American officials understood the legitimacy of his grievances. The Eisenhower administration saw things differently. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Alan Dulles, two brothers whose law firm had represented British oil interests, two men who looked at Iran's nationalist prime minister and saw one word: communist. He wasn't, but in the logic of 1953, that almost didn't matter. The plan had a code name. The Americans called it Operation Ajax. The British called it Operation Coup. The goal was the same: remove Mosaddegh, install a compliant replacement, and get the oil flowing back to Western companies. To run it on the ground, the CIA sent Kermit Roosevelt Jr., grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. Soft-spoken, sharp, and willing, he crossed into Iran quietly in July of 1953, traveling under false name, sometimes lying under a blanket in the back of a moving car. He had a budget, he had a plan, and he had about a month. The operation had three components. One, buy the press. CIA money paid Iranian newspaper editors to flood the country with stories portraying Mosaddegh as a communist tool, a destroyer of Islam, a traitor. Two, buy the streets. Paid agitators staged fake protests, some posing as Mosaddegh supporters, committing acts of violence and attacking mosques, deliberately provoking religious conservatives against him. 3. Buy the army. The replacement prime minister had already been chosen. General Fazlal Zahedi, a man who had collaborated with the Nazis in World War II. Military officers were approached, assembled, and bribed. The wild card was the Shah. Mohammad Reza Shahi Pavid was a 33-year-old, deeply insecure and terrified of making the wrong decision. The CIA needed him to sign a royal decree dismissing Mosaddegh, giving the coup a veneer of constitutional legitimacy. Roosevelt worked on him for weeks. The Shah signed the decree, then panicked. Mosaddegh got wind of it. The officer sent to deliver the dismissal decree was arrested. The Prime Minister went on national radio and announced that the coup had been attempted and defeated. His supporters flooded the streets. The Shah, convinced the game was lost, fled Iran to Baghdad, then Rome, where he sat in a hotel room waiting for a phone call that would tell him it was over. CIA headquarters ordered Roosevelt to stand down and leave the country. Roosevelt didn't move. For 3 more days, the CIA-funded operation continued. Paid crowds kept moving through Tehran. Fake Mosaddegh supporters kept committing outrages designed to inflame religious sentiment. Military units loyal to Zahedi began to organize. And on the morning of August 19th, 4 days after the first attempt had collapsed in failure, the streets of Tehran finally tipped. Pro-Shah forces, military units, and crowds that had been expertly herded towards this moment converged on Mossaddegh's home. After hours of street fighting that left hundreds dead across the city, the residents fell. Mohammad Mosaddegh was arrested in the rubble of his own garden. The Shah fled home from Rome. He told Kermit Roosevelt, "I owe my throne to God, my people to you." The official story, told for decades, was that the coup was about stopping communism, protecting the free world, keeping Iran out of the Soviet orbit. The CIA's own documents say something more revealing. The agency's internal history, written 1 year after the coup and classified for nearly 50 years, described the operation's primary concern as the protection of Western oil interests, not Soviet expansion. Oil. Because the real fear wasn't that Mosaddegh would hand Iran to Moscow. The real fear was that he would succeed. If Iran nationalized its oil and got away with it, if Mosaddegh proved that a developing nation could take back control of its own resources and survive, then every oil-producing nation in the world would be watching. Iraq, Kuwait, Nigeria, Venezuela. The entire architecture of cheap Western access to foreign oil rested on the assumption that host nations would accept the terms they were given. Mosaddegh had challenged that assumption. He could not be allowed to win. As for the Dulles brothers, their former law firm had represented Anglo-Iranian Oil Company clients. Alan Dulles had sat on the board of a company with direct ties to British oil interests. The line between protecting American national security and protecting the financial world the Dulles brothers had come from was, in the summer of 1953, exponentially non-existent. There was one final detail. As the price of American participation in the coup, U.S. oil companies, previously locked out of Iran entirely, were handed 40% of the new consortium that replaced the nationalized company. Britain's shares fell from 100% to 40%. Britain had started the coup to protect its oil monopoly. America finished it and took half the prize for doing so. Mohammad Mosaddegh was tried for treason, convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison. After his release, he was placed under house arrest at his rural estate, where he remained for the rest of his life. He died in 1967, still under guard. The government refused him a public funeral. He is buried in the reception room of his own home. The Shah returned to power and, with American support, built a police state. The SAVAK, his secret police, trained by the CIA, became one of the most feared security services in the region. Democratic opposition was systematically imprisoned, tortured, and destroyed. When the Islamic Revolution came in 1979 and swept the Shah from power, it did so in a country where 26 years of American-backed repression had eliminated almost every moderate, secular, and democratic voice. The liberals and nationalists who might have led a different kind of revolution had been broken. What survived, what was strong enough to fill the vacuum, was the religious establishment that the Shah had never quite managed to destroy. The revolutionaries who seized the American embassy in Tehran and held 52 Americans hostage for 444 days called the building the Den of Spies. They found the CIA's files inside. They published them. The documents confirmed everything Iran had believed about American interference in their country. The hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq War, which America quietly supported, decades of sanctions, the nuclear standoff, the proxy conflicts that continue today across the Middle East, none of these things were caused solely by 1953. History is never that simple. But the coup is where the modern relationship between Iran and the West broke. Comprehensively, deliberately, and with full knowledge of what was being destroyed. In 2013, 60 years after the coup, the CIA formally acknowledged its role in Operation Ajax for the first time. It was the first official American admission that the agency had helped overthrow a democratically elected foreign government. Britain has still not officially acknowledged MI6's role. Mohammad Mosaddegh asked a question in 1951 that the most powerful nations on Earth decided was too dangerous to answer honestly. He asked, "Why is our oil not ours?" That was a reasonable question. It had a reasonable answer. But instead of giving it to him, they gave him Kermit Roosevelt and 4 days of chaos, a military trial in a country that was no longer his to lead. If you want to understand why the Middle East looks the way it does, why the trust between Iran and the West has never fully recovered, why decades of diplomacy kept running into the same wall, you don't have to look very far. You just have to look at August 1953.